Hello, today I'm going to be doing an interview with Maz about his past life and going on a trip. So how are you today? Are you feeling good?
I'm very well, thank you. A bit cold, but it's nice and warm in here.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to start off with is where were you born?
I was born in Pakistan, in a frontier town called Peshawar, which is in the northwest frontier province, in the northern part of the country, very near the border with Afghanistan. In fact, it's called the Khyber Pass, and it's a pass that's been used for hundreds of years for people crossing over into India from sort of Europe.
Okay. And do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have 7 sisters and 3 brothers. One of my sisters passed away about 15 years ago, sadly, but we still have a large family.
Do you get along?
Yes, I think we get along quite well. Most of us do. I think that's because we had a big family. When you have a big family, you need to share things, you need to work things out, compromise. And I think we did that quite well most of the time.
Okay.
It also gave us a lot of security, knowing that it was a big family behind us.
So why did your family choose to move to England, and whereabouts in England did you move?
Okay, my family, well, I would say it was my father who decided to move the family here, and we moved to Colindale in North London, and most of us are in the area. My mother is still there. I'm not that far from there, so we're still in the same area, with the exception of a sister who's in New York, a brother who's in Czech Republic, and another sister in Manchester.
Okay. What was the hardest thing when you moved to England, if there is a reason?
The hardest thing, I suspect, it wasn't really hard, but it was difficult was initially to learn a new language. But I don't think there was anything that difficult for me because I was very young. I was only about 5, and the thing is, when you're young, you're a lot more open to change and new things, and you tend to soak things up. It's all an adventure at that age.
Yeah.
So I didn't find anything difficult. It was interesting and it was new.
Who found it hardest, your mum or your dad moving?
I would say it was my mother, because having come from an Asian culture that was so different to what I was experienced here, she would have found it quite daunting because she couldn't speak the language, she couldn't speak English. But having her family around her, she would have felt secure.
So moving on to now your trip, why did you choose to travel on foot and South America?
I hadn't been away on a holiday or a trip for quite a number of years when I decided to go.
Yeah.
I think the previous trip I'd been on was in 1969. I went back to Pakistan with some of my family and stayed there for a year. So I came back in 1970. So we're talking about 17 years since I'd been away.
Yeah.
And I was getting a bit bored in my job, a bit restless, I would say, is the thing. So I had a friend who was probably equally restless, even though he was a lot older, and we decided one day that it might be fun to go on a trek. We both enjoyed walking, so we thought, well, where would we like to? The Andes Mountains sounded very very interesting, and funnily enough, our original plan was to start off in the south of the continent, work north, and then go across the Amazon jungle as well. And we figured that would take 2 years. But I changed my plan because where I was working, after I'd given my notice in, they decided to give me a year's leave of absence. So that meant I could come back to a job. So that changed my plans in that we then adapted our itinerary just to do the Andes Mountains, and we thought we'll have to do the Amazon another time. But so that was why.
Did your parents find it hard that you were gone for a year?
My parents found it extremely hard.
Yeah.
That I was gone for a year, as any parent would.
Yeah.
And especially in those days, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have email. The only communication was by letter or by telephone landline. And even then, when I did phone home, I had to do what was called reverse charges. So you phone from the other country, and then they would phone to this country and ask the person who answered the phone whether they would accept the call charges. That was called a reverse charge call, and that was the only way we could ring home. And I think I must have done that about 5 or 6 times during that year. So it must have been extremely hard for my parents.
What about your siblings? Did they find it hard, or was some less than others?
I actually really don't know. I'm sure they must have missed me at some point, but again, I think they all had their own lives. I would say the person who probably missed me most, apart from my parents, would have been my niece, who was 3 years old at the time. And she didn't really understand where I'd gone for so long. So I suspect because she used to live with us at the time, and she would have been at a loss as to where I'd gone. Okay.
Okay, so what was your favourite memory of that trip?
My favourite memory of that trip would have been, I think, if I look back on it, is waking up after having camped inside these old Inca ruins. And these aren't the big ruins that you find in places like Machu Picchu. It was one of the lesser ones along what's called the old Camino Real, which is the old royal road that the Inca kings used to use. And there wouldn't have been any tourists up there. In fact, I didn't think there was probably many people up there. But the stonework was amazing. So waking up inside this big square with stone blocks around you was quite awe-inspiring. To see that the Incas would have been living there and sleeping there like we were. So that's probably my most memorable thing. There were so many memories on that trip. The sunrises, the sunsets, the people we met, the hard treks we had, but most it was all good.
And if you had a challenging moment, what would that be, the most challenging moment of the trip?
The most challenging moment of the trip, I think, was we were in Quito in Ecuador, and my friend had gone out with another couple of tourists that we'd met. So they'd gone out for a drink. I decided to stay in the hotel because I was very tired. So I was asleep, and then sometime during the night they all came back with a very drunken person who said he was a policeman, and he was brandishing a gun, demanding to see our passports.
Yeah.
I was, having just been woken up rudely, I was not in the best of moods, and I felt like telling him to go away. But decided against that in case the gun was loaded and he decided to get nasty. So we just had to do as he asked, and then he did go away eventually. So that was probably the most challenging part of the trip. The I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable, it's unusual. My birthday was spent trying to melt some water off some snow so I could boil some porridge as a treat. You know, porridge with chocolate sauce in it. Because we'd run out of water, we were quite high up in the mountains, at about 3,500 meters. So water wasn't very readily available, so we had to wait until this bit of snow melted into our water bottles from the sun.
It's strange.
It's
a strange birthday.
It was a very strange birthday, but it's certainly one I'll remember for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Because I remember having to trek about 3 days before that in the most awful rain. When it rains in Ecuador, it really rains and it doesn't stop. And it rained for 2 solid days. So when we got out the rainy bit, it was such a relief, but we were absolutely soaked. We would go into our tents, our sleeping bags were wet, our clothes were wet. It was very uncomfortable. So my birthday, when it was a bit higher up, it was drier, and we had to wait for the snow to melt, but it was better than being wet.
Yeah. So what was your favourite country that you visited and least favourite country that you visited?
The most favourite country, I would say, was Chile.
Okay.
It was a remarkable mixture of South America and Europe. It was most like Europe out of all the countries we visited, and despite having a military dictatorship, it was actually the most secure.
Yeah.
We could go out at night in a big city and not have to worry about being robbed or anything, or any concerns like that. But also the natural beauty of it was amazing. From the Atacama Desert in the north to the Lake District to Patagonia in the south, with all this natural raw beauty of the mountains and glaciers. So it was amazing country. Yeah. And the least favourite was probably Colombia. That was the first country we tried to walk through.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were having a lot of trouble with drug cartels, so it wasn't particularly a feeling of safety as we were travelling through there. So we just didn't stay there very long, and it was a relief to leave the country to somewhere more sedate like Ecuador.
Were they friendly with tourists?
They weren't that friendly. We always had this feeling of being watched. Yeah. And we had to be aware of our surroundings, and who was around. They may well have been like that just because we were strangers.
Yeah.
So perhaps if we stayed a bit longer, might have found out a bit more. But we couldn't really take the chance. It was very early on in our trip, and we couldn't afford really to have any mishaps.
Okay. What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that would like to travel South America?
To travel South America, I would say, if you can, travel with a good friend.
Yeah.
2 is usually a good number to travel with. You can watch out for each other.
Yeah.
And also go with an open mind, because you will find different people, different cultures. Accept them, and try and join in. Don't hold yourself back, and do it while you can.
Okay. And last question, what would you tell your younger self when, if you could redo it or if you could take something over again when you previously did?
Okay, my younger self, I would say, which you can't do now,
Yeah.
or couldn't do then, is take a digital camera.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing I regretted, was not having enough film, because the memories I could have recapped would have been so much more, and to show people the true beauty of the place. So that's what I would say. Take a digital camera, but also take an open mind and just enjoy it.
Okay, thank you for this interview. Hope you enjoyed it.
I did. Thank you very much.